These impressions of my youth may have left me some prejudices. I owe to them perhaps an erroneous opinion upon the dictatorial regime, but I still wish to think that the regime was not so bad, and that if the different factions would have yielded to it, the Great Republic was founded upon a solid basis. As I have nothing to say of myself that merits public attention, having been until 1798 out of all political employment, I may be permitted to speak of my opinions. Those opinions of 1796 and 1797 have been confirmed by succeeding events, and notwithstanding all the ill that has been said of the dictatorial constitution, I think now, as I did then, that a good Frenchman, a reasonable man, might be a sincere partisan of a republic founded upon so good a legislative basis. If notwithstanding these bases, the Constitution could not resist the internal convulsions and military reverses. It is only to the relative weakness of an executive power too movable, to which it must be attributed, and also with a small portion of good fortune in 1798 and less violence among the parties, and dictatorial regime might have completed the revolution and perfected it by gradual and pacific ameliorations. This assertion will without doubt appear difficult to reconcile with the 18th Brumaire, yet notwithstanding the 18th Brumaire properly considered fully confirms it. It is what I hope to develop in the course of these memoirs. The dictatorial Republican Constitution offered more guarantees for public order than the monarchy of 1791. Let us compare the basis of the two codes. As for the code of 1793, which separates them, it was but a senseless democracy inapplicable to a great nation. In 1791, the sovereign or legislative power was concentrated in a single body, which was to be entirely renewed every 2 years. In 1795, the sovereign power was divided into two bodies, of which the fifth part was to be renewed every year. Now the concentration of the sovereign power in one individual or in a body, what is then but despotism, the frequent and complete renewal of the individual of the body in which the sovereign power is deposited. What else is it but anarchy? The Constitution of 91 was a confused medley of the principles of despotism and anarchy. It had only displaced despotism or legislative unity. It exchanged a hereditary master for a triennial master. The new master was more absolute than the old, for there was no longer either parliament or noblesse or clergy or provincial states to oppose it. On the other side, the triennial, renewed to this absolute sovereign, incessantly brought the whole in question. Every 2 years we might pass from republic to a monarchy and from a monarchy to a republic. They are only needed for this sudden transport of enthusiasm or a decree rested by fear. What a state of society! The assembly called the constituent had not then constituted anything. It had worthily proclaimed the principles of liberty, of civil equality, and universal tolerance, noble and holy inheritance that we owe to it. But it had erred completely in the application. It was an assembly of philosophers rather than an assembly of legislators. And was it to be wondered at how at the first step could it attain its ends in that arduous career, when the history of the world only signalizes 5 or 6 names for the admiration of posterity, for the task which that assembly had given itself, forgetting the limits of its mandates, was absolute, entirely to renew a social order? Solon and Sigurgus were very far from having so great a task to fulfill, and they had passed a long life in meditating upon what we were expected to perform at once. The Constituent Assembly had 4 antecedents, only the theories of Rousseau, of Montesquieu, and of other great writers, and the example of England, and that more recent one of America. But its work answered only those antecedents in its immortal preface, the Declaration of Rights. As for the book itself, Its deplorable influence was and must remain in an inverse sense from the intention of its authors.